They told us the highlands were a plain of stone, and sky, a place where distance did not measure itself in kilometers, but in hours of weather. We drove into it on a day that had no edges. Fog lay on the road like unwound wool, snagging on the shoulders of black lava, and the yellow markers that blinked past like the faint memory of civilization. The GPS turned into a blank stare. The radio hissed and then fell silent. In the back, our suitcases thumped with a rhythm that felt like a heart we had borrowed and might have to return. There were 6 of us. Finur, our driver, a quiet man whose beard seemed older than his face. Noor, who carried her camera like a small animal that might bolt if startled. Pavel, a geologist with the knees of a man twice his age and the curiosity of a child. Iris, who never talked about Spain unless it was about the sea. Jonah, who admitted right after takeoff that he had not flown anywhere in 10 years and then promptly fell asleep. And me, Mai, who made a living writing about places and a secret habit of writing about the people I became in those places. We were supposed to take a loop that an online forum called a ribbon of road through nothingness. We were supposed to get to the far ridge before dusk and sleep in a hut with bunks and a wood stove, and a logbook where previous guests drew doodles of ghost sheep. We were supposed to keep moving. Instead, the fog swallowed the signpost at the turn, and the road we were on wasn't a road anymore but a suggestion, and Finur slowed us down until the suggestion stopped altogether. "We pull over," he said. "We wait." We pulled over into the side of the world. There was no sound except the engine and the light tapping of Noor's fingers on her lens cap. The fog was not the blank white of postcards. It had veins. It had a smell like wet wool and crushed moss. It had the particular silence of a room where someone is asleep. "We could walk," Jonas said, as if he knew how to make a statement. "Stick to the air like breath. Stretch our legs, find a higher place, maybe see the road from there." Finner looked at him for a long time and then nodded. "We walk, but not far. I have ropes." He took a coil from the back and made us a daisy chain loop to loop hand to hand so that we would not disappear one by one without anyone noticing. The fog took our heat and folded it into itself. We moved in a line, each holding the knot that connected us to the next person, listening to the soft grit of our boots on the pumice and the not quite silence of a world pressed close. I was the third in line. Pavel's shoulders loomed in and out of existence in front of me. He was talking to himself in Czech, the way some people hum to reassure a skittish horse. "Basalt," he said in English, as if that were an incantation. "Columnar joints, you see." If we could see. "What do you think you see?" Noor asked from behind me. "The memory of fire." Pavel laughed, the sound small and brave. "It is everywhere here." The ground tipped down and then up. We crested something that might have been a hill and might have been the world's smallest continent, and when we went down again, the fog thinned not everywhere, but in a strip ahead, as if someone had drawn a blade through cloth. A dark line appeared fence wall, and above it the soft angles of roofs that were not the roofs of any hut I had seen on the map. Village Finur said, not quite believing it. We came to a low wall of stone and turf, stitched together by roots. The mist streamed around it, the way a river parts for a rock. Over the wall, houses like hummocks, small and round windows, no bigger than a dinner plate. Smoke rose from somewhere, braided itself into fog. The path under our boots turned from grit to packed earth. There were fences made of woven branches and the breathy sound of sheep. There was the smell of peat and something cooking that involved salt and a long patience. Noor touched my arm. "Is this on the map?" I whispered. "I don't know." The first person we saw was a woman in an apron the colour of weathered lichen. She stood in a doorway with a bowl in her hands and a child half hidden in her skirt. She did not look surprised. She did not look like someone who had been waiting. She looked like someone who had always been there the way a particular rock in a river has always been there for the river to learn its shape around. "Good day," she said in English that had the sound of old dictionaries. "You are lost." "Yes," Finur said. And then, as if correcting himself, "We are found." The woman smiled. "We have bread and a blue drink to put life back on your tongues. Come in, for the fog is greedy." We unlooped from the rope as if it were a spell we were careful not to break, and ducked under a lintel more carved by hands than tools. Inside was warmth, like a memory. The ceiling was low enough that Pavel had to stoop. A black kettle sighed on a hook in the fireplace. On the table, a loaf as dark as soil butter, like a slab of sunbowls, with a stew that smelled of lamb and herbs I could not name. The woman poured the blue drink into cups, no two alike. The child, her face peaked with solemn curiosity, slid into a corner and watched us as if we were a play, and she had been given tickets by someone mysterious. "My name is Svanhilda," the woman said. "This is our house. You may call it as your own just now." The drink was not sweet exactly. It tasted like berries that had learned to love wind. It scoured my mouth in a friendly way, like a stone polished by years in someone's pocket. I felt the fog unravel in my lungs. I felt a small corner of myself unclench. "Where is this place?" Iris asked, cradling the bowl with both hands, as if it were a sleeping cat. Svanhilda tilted her head. "Here." But on a map, Jonah persisted, glancing at Finur to see if this kind of question was allowed. "There are maps that keep secrets," Svanhilda said, as if explaining something to a child. "And secrets that keep maps. You'll leave in the morning and find the road where the light knows you again." "People live here?" Noor asked. "I don't mean of course you do. I just mean we didn't see." "Fog is a door," Svanhilda said. "Sometimes it closes. Sometimes it opens. You came when it was kind. The stew was the kind of food that untangles the knot between hunger and shame." We ate without talking for a while. The child in the corner edged closer. Noor made a picture of her with her eyes and then with her camera, but the flash was off and the shutter soft as breath. The child's eyes were the color of a river stone. Her hair was the exact brown of peat under water. Bara Svanhilda said to the child, "Take them to the communal house when they have emptier bowls. The others will want to hear about the world beyond the edge." "The communal house?" I asked. "It is where we go to say out loud the things that would grow too large if we kept them in," Svanhilda said. "Stories, songs, names. Guest right here is a story for a bowl, a song for a bed, a secret for a second cup. You have already eaten." "So?" Her smile was not unkind. "What will you bring us?" after I looked at Noor, who had a song in her camera and maybe more in her throat. I looked at Iris, who held herself like a ship braced against a weather she knew too well. I looked at Pavel, whose hands had the remembered shape of stone. Guessed right, I thought, and felt a little thrill the way you do when an old word stands up and stretches and looks at you. "We have stories," I said. "At least I do," good Svanhilda said. "We have ears." The communal house was sunk into the earth with benches built into the turf, so that when you sat you could feel the ground thinking under you. There were maybe 20 people inside their faces, lit from below by a row of oil lamps, whose flames wavered as if in agreement with some unspoken point. They made room for us, as if we were late to our own lives. The air smelled of smoke and wool, and the sugar of something just beginning to caramelize. An old man with a hat like a collapsed mushroom tapped his knuckles on the table. "We have guests," he said. "Guests are always a weather. Tell us what your weather has been. Finua looked at me, and I realized that somewhere in the small alphabet of our rope walk through the fog, I had become the person who went first. My name is Mai, I said. I move from place to place and turn what I see into words and then into money, which I turn into a plane ticket to another place. The last time I wrote home, my mother wrote back, "You are becoming mist. One day you will have no hands left to hold what you love." The communal house quieted the way a room does when it opens a chair for someone who has decided to say something true. The old man tapped again, a smaller sound. "And do you feel it?" "Every time a place becomes a paragraph," I said. "I think I have taken something that belonged to wind and given it a spine and a price. I'm sorry if this offends, but it is who I am." "No offense," he said. "We do the same. We turn weather into words and then into winter food. The price is not always coins." Noor told a story about a rooftop in Casablanca and a grandmother who could taste a storm 6 days before it came because her ears buzzed like a hive. Iris told a story about a bay in Galicia and a man who sailed out on a blue day and returned in the form of a letter that never explained anything. Pavel told a story about a quarry, where he learned that stone can tell you how much it can bear if you ask with your hand and not your hammer. Jonah confessed that he had saved every boarding pass from every flight he had ever taken and kept them in a shoebox, like the bones of birds. They told us stories in return. The old man, his name was Katil, told us about a mountain whose shadow changed shape before a storm growing antlers, and the hunters who learned to read it. A woman with a scar, like a lowercase J, under her ear, told us about a horse that came up out of a lake and asked to be harnessed, and how you could tell if it wanted to drag you down by the way it looked at the mud. A boy with hair the color of ice told us about a fox that learned to mimic the sound of rocks so perfectly that when it crossed a scree field, the mountain did not notice. Some stories were funnier than ours. Some were crueler. Most were better at leaving room in the air afterward. Then Bara tugged at my sleeve. "There is a place I like," she said very softly, as if telling me about a hiding place in a house where the walls try not to overhear. "Do you want to see?" I looked at Finna. He shrugged. "Your life, your steps." Noor raised an eyebrow that meant yes. We followed Bara outside. The fog had loosened. It lay in long bands over the fields, like a river that had been laid on its side to dry. The stars were a salt throw on a black floor. Bara's hand was small and sure in mine. She led us past the low wall across a sheep path, over a stone where water had polished its thoughts into it, and then to a shallow hollow where the grass looked as if it had been combed. She crouched down and put her ear to the soil. "Listen." I lay beside her face, close to the damp and the small, multilingual language of insects. At first there was only my breath and the slow thump of blood in my ear. Then something else, a sound like murmuring, too regular to be the wind in the grass, too alive to be the movement of water. "What do you hear?" Noor whispered. "Walking," Bara said. "Small feet. They go up to the mountain and back again. When the fog is kind, they make a path." "Whose feet?" I asked, though I knew the story wanted me to ask it. Bara turned her head and looked at me very seriously. "If you ask, that they stop. If you listen, they keep going." We lay there for a while, 3 heads in a row, like stones some careful person had found and set to dry. The small feet went toward the mountain and then came back, and went toward the mountain, and then came back as if practicing. I felt the shape of my heart change a little, the way a shore changes after a tide that was higher than anyone expected. When we stood, Bara took something out of her pocket and pressed it into my hand. It was a button carved from bone with a flower scratched on it, and 2 holes that were not quite even. "To pin yourself to yourself," she said. "What about you?" Don't you need it? She shook her head. I am pinned already. At some point, we slept all of us in the communal house on benches and under blankets that felt like sheep who had decided they liked us. Sleep came like a story we had heard before but did not mind hearing again. In my dream, I walked into a book and found it was a door, and the door opened onto fog, and the fog had hands that were not hands, but very persuasive. I woke to the specific grey that means morning has chosen you. Someone had put a hand on my shoulder and pulled me back from wherever I had gone. Noor sat up at the same time I did, and our eyes met the way birds do on a wire before the wind reminds them of their jobs. Iris was already standing smoothing the blanket with the tenderness of a habit. Pavel snored like a handsaw. Jonah's mouth was open as if he had fallen asleep in the middle of catching a coin. We stepped outside into a morning that had decided to be bright. The fog had retreated to the mountains like a guest who knows when to leave. The sky was that legally suspicious blue that high places have. We looked for the outline of roofs, and for the plumes of smoke, and the small doors, and Bara's solemn eyes. We looked for the woven fences and the low wall, and the path we had worn from the house to the communal pit. None of it was there. The field was not exactly empty. It had a fullness that an empty room may have if it has been called a stage. The grass was combed the way it had been in the hollow, where we listened to the small feet as if someone had brushed it with a wide hand. There were dew beads in it, like seed pearls. In the place where the communal house had been, the earth was the earth, no scar, no depression, no heat. The road beyond rolled away, obvious now a ribbon of certainty. Noor said I took pictures. We looked at the back of her camera together. Black frames, a handful of weird white flares, a close-up of a button in a small palm that was as clear as a face. One picture of a table, but if there were bowls on it, the fog had eaten them. One picture of a doorway in which there might have been a woman if the light had not decided to be heavy. I glanced at Noor. She was smiling a little. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile that said, if a story wants to be itself, who am I to tell it how Finur stood very still, hands in pockets, and then he turned like a compass needle that had been hesitating, and suddenly remembered the iron under the floorboards. We should go. The light is good, and it will stay good for a while. What about Jonah? The gestured at the everything that had been something last night. People in the Highlands know, Finner said. You don't chase a fog, you say thank you and eat the bread it put in your hands, and then you go back to the road. I would have gone back to the road. I would have folded it into my story the way you fold a map that never quite becomes the same shape it was when it came out of the box. I would have put the bone button in my pocket and taken it out in hotel rooms and watched my own face in mirrors that made me look more or less like myself. But the ground in front of the place where the low wall had not been was marked with prints. Small prints, not toddler small, not baby small, but the small of someone who had not outgrown the version of their feet that had learned the word for running. The prints shone where the dew had chosen them as a home. They went from the place that had been the place to the foot of the mountain, where a seam of darker rock ran like a mouth closed in thought. Bara, I said, before I could stop myself from saying it. Don't Noor began, but not because she wanted to stop me, because she knew it would not. I tried to imagine these prints as the prints of a fox. They were not. I tried to imagine them as the prints of a small person who had come from another place to play a trick and then gone home. They were not. They were the prints that had walked under our ears. They were a path that had been practicing. We have to follow. Jonah was surprising himself even as he spoke. His hands opened and closed as if remembering how to hold on to a rope. We can't not. Finur looked at the sky, calculating, thinking about the kind of light this world sells for free, and the price people like us always end up paying for it. We don't have to go far, I said. Noor took a deep breath and put the camera in her bag without the lens cap. Okay, she said, but we go like last night. We go as if the fog is still here, and we are all each other's hands. We walked not in a line, but in a shallow arc, close enough that if one of us stopped, the others would feel the air change and stop too. The prince led us across a strip of tussock grass, and then onto a vein of basalt, where they became harder to read, but not impossible if you had learned to listen with your eyes. They went to the seam in the mountain and continued up it until the seam rose higher than any of our heads, and the prince climbed the stone itself, which should have been impossible except to tell the truth. It didn't feel like that kind of day. At shoulder height in the seam, there was a place where the rock was a different kind of dark. I put my fingers on it. It was not colder. If anything, it was warmer. A human warmer kitchen warm. The seam was not a seam. It was a door that had imagined itself as closed so hard that most people would never try to open it. I pressed. Nothing. Jonah pressed beside me. Nothing. Noor touched it very lightly, the way you touch the surface of water at night to see if fish will come. The rock shivered. It was a breath that had been held since the last time someone had stood here and laid their hand on it and said without a sound, "Please." The rock opened. It didn't swing or grind. It unthought itself. Inside was a corridor of not rock, not a tunnel, not exactly a room. Imagine the moment after a person leaves a room, but before the air settles back into its old shape that. The prince went in. We went in. If you have ever walked into a church you did not believe in and felt something inside you stand up anyway and smooth your hair, you know the sensation. The not rock smelled like iron and sweet grass, and the thing that bees know and forget and know again. We were not walking down. We were not walking up. We were walking along the idea of a hill. The light came from the curve of the knot ceiling, the way a thought can glow when it is just about to become words. "Hello," Iris called, and the word lay itself on the knot air and did not echo. It blossomed and then folded up quietly like an apology for taking up space. Something moved ahead of us. It was not a person. It was a people. Some had the shape of villagers, and some had the shape of stories that had learned to wear shoes. One had a face made of the negative space in a family photograph where someone had once stood. One had a mouth that was just an opening where a river sang through. One had a wool cap and hands that could tie knots of fog. And there was Bara, slightly bent, with the carefulness of someone trying to hold too many cups of water up a staircase without spilling. She set them down and turned to us with a look that was not surprise. "You followed," she said. "Of course." "We wanted to." Noor stumbled. "To thank you. For last night. For the button." Bara nodded as if we had said something sensible. "Guessed right," she said. "It is not a coin. It is a way of not being lost. You ate. We took your stories to the pantry. It will be a good winter." "The village," Jonah said, and then realized he should say more, and couldn't. The village said a woman whose scarf was the same green as the inside of a wave is a thing we do together when the weather and our memory agree. It has nothing to do with maps. Maps are for telling people where you think they can go. Villages are for telling people where they can stay until they remember their feet. "Where are we now?" I asked. "The seam," she said. "What holds the stone together when it is cold? What we walk along when we want to be held together too. Are you?" Pavel gestured at them at us at the corridor that was not a corridor. People. Sometimes said Katil, who seemed to be Katil again, though his hat was now the shape of something that grows on the undersides of ships. sometimes story, sometimes weather in a shape that kindness can use. Why did the prince go in, I asked, because the question was a pebble in my shoe, and I had to stop and shake it out. Because small feet are good at remembering, Bara said. Adults think in roads, children think in paths. Paths are the old roads, the ones that knew how to get across a place without making it forget what it was. Small feet go where big ideas cannot. Iris had her hands pressed together. Can we see the village again? Is the fog kind? Katil asked. We all listened with our different cities and our different childhoods. I heard the bees again and the sound of small feet and my own breath doing what it had always done. I could not hear fog. I did not know whether that was because it had gone or because it had decided it did not need to make noise for us to believe in it. Perhaps I said, which is a word with a handle. Bara stepped closer to me. You have something of mine. I touched the bone button in my pocket and brought it out. It lay in my palm, warm, because I had made it so. The flower scratched onto it was the kind you draw when someone says draw a flower, and your hand remembers the first flower your hand ever drew. You said, my voice felt fragile. You said you were pinned already. I am, Bara said. But you are not. Not yet. Keep it. Guest right has rules, and guest right has instincts, and between the two is a place where you must become your own rule. I closed my hand around the button. I wanted to say something like, I don't deserve kindness that comes out of the earth itself. I wanted to say something like, I will write about you, and I know that is a kind of theft. I wanted to say something like, I have been a fog, and I want to be a village. You will pay us, the scarfed woman said, as if reading a list in which my name had always been. You will tell a story. There are debts that add weight to the debtor, and debts that add weight to the world. Ours is the second kind. What story? Noor asked. The true kind, Katil said, and smiled, which is not the same as the factual kind. They set before us cups of the blue drink, each one in a different vessel. Mine was in a cup carved from wood, so thin I could see my own impatience through it. We drank, and they brought out bread, whose holes were like small caves, and butter with salt that had been a sea and then a field, and then a sea again. While we ate, we listened. There was a low sound that might have been the seam singing a high sound that might have been the first minute of a storm. A middle sound that might have been the world remembering the parts of itself it had used other names for. There was no clock. Then the knot rock softened, or else our sense of it did. The corridor unspooled the door, thought itself into stone again, and we were standing at the base of the mountain with the seam at our backs, and the prints shining in the grass in front of us, and the road beyond that patient, as if it had known we would take our time. We walked back to the van without speaking. Finur did not say I told you so, which I realized then he could have in a language I would have understood only later. We got in. The fog had climbed higher, the way a guest might move from a chair to the window, to let you have the seat with the better light. The GPS woke up. The radio tried out a singer and then changed its mind. We drove. After an hour of road that couldn't remember the last time it had been anything else, Pavel patted at his pockets and pulled out something that made him go very still. It was a river pebble smooth as an egg. In it, somehow the lines of basalt columns had been traced not by hand, not by acid, not by anything he could name. The pebble held the memory of a cliff. I didn't. He looked at us at Finur at the little rock's insistence on being itself. Did one of you? No one had. He held it like a new fact. I looked at the button in my pocket. I had the dangerous thought that it was heavy, in a way I had been waiting my whole life to carry. I did not write the story right away. I sat with it the way you sit with a friend who has asked you to hold their coat while they go say something that might change a room. We went to the hut with the wood stove and the logbook and the little drawings of sheep that were ghosts of sheep, or sheep being haunted by their own habit of sheepness. We ate noodles from a pot and laughed the way people laugh when they haven't decided yet whether to tell each other something. At 2 in the morning, the sun didn't set as much as sit down and lean back on its elbows. Noor took pictures of the idea of darkness. Jonah found a board game in a cabinet and learned that time can be a polite shape for people to sit around. When we went back to the city, my mother wrote, "You are back where clocks are. Drink water." I did. I went to the market and bought peaches that had been trucked in from a place the seller called down south, as if the map were a ladder one could simply climb. I put the bone button on my desk and watched it not change. I wrote notes on postcards and never sent them. I opened the file that said Highlands Fog Village and wrote nothing, and then less than nothing, and then an outline that looked like a fence with too many crossings in it. One night I dreamed that my shoes wouldn't stay on my feet. In the morning I sewed the bone button onto the inside hem of my jacket where my fingers could find it when I was in a street I didn't know and had become too good at pretending that I did. When I touched it, I remembered the sound of small feet and how the fog has hands if you need them, and no hands at all if you don't. Noor sent me a picture of the table that had been a table with bowls that had been bowls. It was almost nothing. But when I looked at it long enough, the light shifted, and the black smudge at the left margin became not a smudge, but a fingerprint of smoke, and the line along the bottom that looked like a scratch was the edge of a plate. If you were there when it happened, you could still be there. If you weren't, it was a picture of a wooden rectangle with shadows on it. And neither was a lie. Iris sent a voice message. It was the sound of waves. She didn't say anything. I understood. Jonah mailed me a boarding pass, which was so very Jonah that I laughed and cried at the same time. On the back, he had written, "When we are lost, we are closest to learning." Thank you. Pavel returned to the quarry he had loved when he was young and put the pebble down in the corner where the rain collected, and I pretend I do not know that he visits it every Tuesday with a sandwich and half an hour to let his hand rest on it. And I wrote. Not the piece my editor wanted, not the listicle with a number in the title and an economy of nouns. I wrote what I thought they had asked for the true kind. I erased the name of the country. I called the road nothing that could be Googled. I drew the map the way you draw a face from memory, when you know the person will read it and either forgive you or not. I put in the sound of small feet. I put in guessed right, and how giving a story can make you larger instead of smaller. I put in the morning and its bright betrayal, how it gave us back the ordinary world and asked us to carry it more carefully. I sent it to no one. I read it to a room that was not a room, but a seam in a city far from lava, where fog is mostly exhaust or nostalgia rather than weather. People cried a little. People laughed. People came up afterward and told me about church basements and bus stops and their grandmother's kitchens and what they hear when the radiator knocks twice in the winter, in the hour before dawn. A man told me I used to think magic would be fireworks. Now I think it is the thing that makes a Thursday larger. Months later, I went back. I did not pretend that I knew how to find the place. I did what people do. Drove until the road felt like a friend stopped. When the light did the thing it does just before evening makes a small decision. I walked with my hands in my pockets until my right hand found the button, and my left hand did not feel like the hand I used to apologize for my own existence. I listened. The fog came like a story you love too much to tell badly. I lay down in the grass and put my ear to the ground the way you do when you are trying to remember how to be a creature. The small feet went up to the mountain and back again. Up, back, up, back. Practicing. The fog touched my face the way my mother did when I left for school the first time. I did not see the village. That was not its job that day. The road stayed a road. The seam remained rock. I walked back to the car and sat in it and wept. Not because I was sad, but because my life had felt for a moment as if it fit me, and such moments are rare and need salt to cure them. On the flight home, I wrote a sentence on a napkin and tucked it into my wallet. It said, "The line between real and not real is where we keep our guest right." It said we pay with stories, and the debt we make is the kind that keeps us from blowing away. It said, "There will be mornings when the village is gone, and we will have to be the village ourselves. Sometimes when I am in a place that tries too hard to prove it is real. Conferences, airports, meetings, scenes, where everyone uses the word deliverable as if it were soup. I touch the inside hem of my jacket. The button is smooth and human warm because I have been wearing it for a long time now. I think of Bara's face, not her features which are losing their edges in my mind, but the shape of her attention, the way she did not look surprised to see us at the seam. I think of Svanhilda's voice, the way she said, "Here when what we asked for was a pin in the world that would let us hang our fear up for a while." In the years since people have written to tell me they found the village, or one like it. It is a cabin that was not there yesterday, but now is a place where a fire is just becoming itself. It is a light in a city window that you think is your own reflection, until someone moves inside, and you realize you have been given a glimpse of a life you will never live, but which improves the life you have. It is a child's footprint on a stone in a park, in a city where no children are allowed after dark, and the print is not a warning. It is permission. I do not tell them whether I believe them. Belief is a door that should open inward. Sometimes in the market, I buy a button from a mason jar of old buttons, the way people buy old photographs of other people's relatives at yard sales. I hold it for a moment. If it feels like anything, I put it back. If it feels like something that could hold cloth to cloth, and also story to skin, I put it in my pocket and later mail it to someone who once told me they wished they had a place to pin themselves to themselves. I don't say who it is from. They know. We all know. There are mornings when the fog is unkind, as Svanhilda warned that it sometimes is. There are mornings when it sits on the city and makes car alarms sound like the thin wail of a goat lost on a cliff. There are mornings when you will remember that the village gave you something when you had very little to give it back. There are mornings when the little feet are your own and you will practice walking toward the mountain and away from it on your way to the corner store. And the mountain will be nothing like a mountain and everything like one. On those mornings, touch your button, tell a story, pay your debt in the currency that makes everything larger. And when the fog lifts and the road appears exactly where you left it, walk it more carefully as if it is a guest in your country, and you are responsible for its good time. Someone will ask you one day if it really happened. You will have 100 ways to answer. Here is mine. It happened the way bread happens, by people being present, by something invisible, doing its work by time and heat, agreeing to become hunger's new name. It happened the way weather happens by the sky, deciding to remember water. It happened the way stories happen, because we kept to the path, even when it was only a line of small, shining prints across the grass. And because we took care when they led us into the mountain, and because when we came back out again, we did not pretend we had not been changed. Maps still help, roads still carry, But on the hem of my jacket is a bone button with a flower scratched into it. Two holes not quite even, and behind those holes, the memory of a village that is not on any map and therefore lives in the place where maps begin.